Hello, my name is Arthur Bell, and I'm the Hutton McRoberts Assistant Curator of Ottoman, Middle Eastern and Asian Arms and Armour here at the Wallace Collection. Today, I want to talk about poetry and daggers. Specifically, I want to talk about an amazing 16th century dagger with 4 lines of poetry on it. Why are these lines on here? Who wrote them, and in what context? And what can these lines of poetry tell us about the dagger more broadly? But I also want to turn these questions around and ask, what do the forms and functions of daggers mean for poetic language? How are daggers used in metaphor, and what do they signify? First of all, let's have a closer look at the dagger. Even before we start looking at its inscriptions, this is a fascinating object. Its hilt, which is made of nephrite jade, carved in what we commonly call a pistol grip form, has been richly decorated with carefully carved floral motifs, which were then outlined in gold. The center of each flower is accentuated with an inlaid ruby. These accentuations are likely later additions to the hilt, as they cover up breaks in the jade, which can be seen here. The dagger comes with a scabbard with silver gilt fittings, and they are typical of Ottoman silversmithing of the late 18th century. There is even a French import mark for Paris, used between 1809 and 1819, which gives us a useful terminus antiquem for the scabbard. It seems likely that the repairs to the hilt were done at the same time as the new scabbard was fitted. The blade, on the other hand, is much older. It is part of a small group of surviving blades, which are inlaid with gold across their entire length. This particular example is thought to date from the middle of the 16th century, and when I unsheath it like this, I find that I am immediately drawn to the lines of poetry in the center of the composition. And the subtle cartouches and the delicate floral patterns only serve to focus one's attention. Following Arabic, Persian and Turkish poetic convention, each line of poetry is divided into 2 half lines, which are here arranged vertically. Let's start with the first line, which reads, "How could the thirsty not give up their souls on seeing it? Your dagger is water that flows from a beautiful waste." Now this is a line in Turkish from the early 16th century poet Fuzuli. A resident of Iraq, Fuzuli was a true Renaissance man. Not only did he compose poetry in Arabic and Persian, as well as in his native Turkish, he was also an accomplished mathematician and astronomer. Central to this line of poetry is the equation of the poetic dagger with water. Of course, a well-polished blade shimmers in the light, like flowing water. But here, Fuzuli additionally draws from a rich poetic tradition with a strong religious undercurrent. To a Shi'i Muslim like Fuzuli, the combination of themes of water and the dagger, and of thirst and of death, would evoke the martyrdom of the Imam Hussein at Karbala, a key event in Shia history. The events at Karbala, which are ritually reenacted by Shia Muslims in Iran and Iraq during the month of Muharram, culminate in the death of Imam Hussein. As he lay dying, Hussein begs his killers for a drop of water, but they refuse him and tell him that he must drink water from the blade. Hussein is then promised by the Archangel Gabriel that upon his death, he will be welcomed to heaven by his father, the Imam Ali, who will present him with a crystal cup filled with the waters of paradise. Thus, the water of the blade is equated with the heavenly rewards that await the martyr. However, by the middle of the 16th century, towards the end of Fuzuli's lifetime, and just a few decades before this blade was likely made, this type of poetic imagery, with blades and water and thirst and death, had become a little tired. An amusing anecdote from the poet Zainuddin Vasavi, a contemporary of Fuzuli from the city of Herat in modern-day Afghanistan, illustrates this. He describes one day sitting down with the literati of Herat, then a major city of global significance. When he sits down with these eminent men, he says, "We started talking about the poet Katbi. One of his original images is contained in this famous line. The sound of the blade of your tongue frees my soul of bodily pain, just as the sound of water takes away the suffering of the sick." Everyone started talking eloquently about this just judgment of him, and adorned the keen sword of his tongue with jewels of praise, rendering him his due. In the course of this discussion, one of those present said, "Is it possible to compose a poem which, like Katbi's, would contain the words water and blade, and yet be full of original images from beginning to end?" Some of those present considered this to be exceedingly difficult to do. Others thought it impossible. I expressed great surprise at their exaggeration of the difficulty and turned my attention to seeking out those images. Like a deep-sea diver, I dived into the sea of thought and gathered up splendid pearls of images. I ended up composing 5 poems, every line of which contained the words water and blade. It is clear then that when Fuseli composed his lines, this kind of imagery was very common, and not just within a Shi'i context. Vesavi himself, for example, was a devout Sunni Muslim, and the two remaining lines on our dagger also point towards a more complex religious milieu. Two more lines, here, and in the cartouche on the reverse, here, were composed by the Turkish poet Baki. Not only was he a Sunni judge, he was also closely associated with the Ottoman court, and in particular with the famous Ottoman ruler Suleiman I, who is often known in Europe as Suleiman the Magnificent. As a poet, he is famous for writing on the theme of love. But here we must be aware that expressions of earthly love are additionally deepened by their association with Sufi ideas surrounding love of the divine and the relationship between the individual and God. This idea is most evident in Baki's first line, which reads, "Baki's hand would have encircled the beloved's waist, had not your blood-spilling dagger come between." On a surface level, it is a lament for unattainable love, but when we read it through a religious lens, we can see it as an expression of the inattainability of divine love. As with the water and blade imagery, the deadly qualities of the dagger allow it to occupy a mediating role between earthly existence and the divine hereafter. This is something that also comes across in the second line, which reads, "The dagger, shaped like the letter Ra, does not leave the waist of that moon. It is this place that kills the lovers." The fourth and final line on the blade of the dagger unfortunately cannot currently be attributed to a particular poet, but again it draws on now familiar themes. It reads, "Your bejeweled dagger is the leaf of a lily on which the dew has fallen. Oh, your tongue is a leaf, but one made of iron and stone." The imagery surrounding water, which we discussed earlier, returns in the form of the dew on the leaf of a lily. The poetic likeness between the leaf of the lily and the blade of the dagger is another common trope in Turkish, Persian and Arabic poetry, and has its parallel in the English expression, "a blade of grass." As we can see, the dagger is a rich source of imagery in each of these lines, and occupies different thematic positions that draw from its form and decoration, as well as its function. The close and complex relationship between the poetic dagger on the one hand and the physical dagger on the other hand shows that these were more than just utilitarian objects. They formed an important part of people's cultural lives as tools and weapons, but also as jewelry and as literary imagery. Today we've really only looked at one dagger with a few lines of poetry, but there are so many more in the cases around me, and I hope you'll come visit us at the Wallace Collection.